Every Legion Astartes was reliant predominantly on the Martian Mechanicum during the Great Crusade in order to stay armed and armoured. While this remains true today, at least to some extent, there is one Legion whose bonds with Mars have only strengthened over the millennia. Having lost their Primarch at the beginning of the Horus Heresy, the Legion has become an extremely tenacious chapter, renowned for their relentless nature and the use of bionics, much as had been established whilst their Gene Father lived. They come from the world below us, a dark and hostile world with an unstable environment and a legendary space station in orbit that is probably nearly as large as it is. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Medusa, home of the 10th Legion Astartes. Known as the Iron Tenth and led by the Gorgon Ferrus Manus, they are the Iron Hands. This is their tale, from their inception to the close of the Horus Heresy. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to Legions, a 40k Stories mini-series. The 10th Legion were formed late in the Unification Wars from the gene seed of the Primarch Ferrus Manus. They were known initially as the Stormwalkers, whether with or without the space is debated, and were particularly drawn from the Terran region known as Albia, much like the Night Lords who we covered previously. They are not stated as fighting in the Unification Wars, but were definitely involved in the early Great Crusade as it pushed out through the Sol system, possibly one of the moons of the gaseous world like Io or Ganymede, against various mutants. The first indication of their tendencies came against the Orcs on the world designated Rust. The Stormwalkers were shown to be very proficient using heavy firepower, but had a tendency to use the slower moving weapons as opposed to the lightning assaults of the Lunar Wolves and such. It is unknown whether the bonds with the Mechanicum came before or after Manus' rediscovery, but the bionic augmentation had certainly not begun at this time, as it was done to mimic the Gorgon. Unlike the other legions we've covered, the 10th did not have to cover nearly the entire galaxy and wait until the later end of the Great Crusade to find their Primarch, as Ferrus Manus was in fact the 4th Primarch of all to be found by the Imperium, on the world below us, Medusa, near to the Eye of Terror. Ferrus Manus did not land amongst the Medusan populace. In fact, he barely encountered them until he was a full-grown adult, and even then he chose to avoid them. When he arrived, supposedly inside the volcano known as Karashi, he began to investigate the rocks and chambers his arrival had exposed, noting their unnatural formation and their unique runes and stalagmites. Unfortunately, he accidentally woke up and unleashed Asinoth, known as the Great Silver Worm. Asinoth was a creature of living metal, probably a Canoptech construct, though no Necron presence has ever been found on Medusa, and was impervious to the Primarch's attacks, but for some reason did not kill Manus. Ferrus swore that he would kill the beast, and shunned the Medusan tribes in order to train and become stronger so as it would be possible. He eventually cornered the worm, but was only able to harm and kill it by drowning it in magma. As Asinoth died/shut down, the living metal melted and fused with the arms of the Primarch, giving Manus the quote-unquote iron hands that would come to shape his legion for the rest of time. With the beast dead, Ferrus finally joined up with the roaming tribes of Medusa, teaching them of technology. He must have just known this as it was likely not present on world. Like most other Legion homeworlds, Medusa flourished under the leadership of Ferrus Manus. But the Gorgon was no dictator, keeping interclan rivalries healthy and remaining neutral to make the Medusans stronger. Eventually, the Emperor and the Great Crusade showed up, though it is unknown whether the previously found Primarchs were actually present. Considering one of them is an unknown Primarch, we will likely never know. Manus did not accept the Emperor immediately and challenged him to a contest. It is said that the fight between them levelled mountains, but that may just be hyperbole. Then again, it was the Emperor versus a Primarch, so maybe. What is known, though, is at the end of the duel, Ferrus accepted that the Emperor was his match, and joined up with the Great Crusade at the head of the 10th Legion, known now as the Iron Hands after the living metal arms of the Primarch. The Iron Hands won much fame during the Great Crusade, though their actions were perhaps less renowned than some other legions, like the Lunar Wolves. Whilst they will have fought on worlds uncounted with Ferrus Manus at their head, One of the most famous actions concerning the 10th actually came against a faction based in space, the human civilization known as the Diasporex. The Diasporex were something like the human equivalent to the Tau, having created a multicultural society with alien allies that wished to live in harmony with the galaxy. Of course, the Iron Hands were having none of that, trying to wipe the entire civilization out after the human element refused to join the Imperium. After a lengthy space campaign that eventually dragged in the Emperor's Children Legion as well, the Diasporex were wiped out or enslaved. The traits established pre-Manus were only accentuated during this period, as the Iron Hands became an extremely tenacious force that preferred heavy fire and had a very calculating edge. This is likely why the Legion became known as the Iron Tenth, along with their closer ties to all things metallic. Because of the need for material for their big guns, the Mechanicum Legion bonds went from strength to strength, and in honour of their Primarch, many legionaries had their arms replaced with metal bionics. This would later become far more pronounced, as in when the chapter was a thing, but in a log or diary, Manus is quoted as saying that he wished his sons to stop. He acknowledged the power of his hands and what he had achieved with them, but he knew that they weren't his, they weren't flesh. Ferrus wished for his sons to stop their distrust for human flesh, but he would never get chance, for reasons we will discuss later. During the Crusade, Manus became especially close with Fulgrim, Primarch of the Emperor's Children. The two were both master artisans, and on their first meeting on Terra, the two immediately engaged in a contest to forge the greatest weapon. It took them weeks, but from the anvils and the fires came the mighty hammer Forgebreaker and the elegant Fireblade, made by Fulgrim and Ferrus respectively. Immediately arguing that their brother's creation was the superior to their own, the two swapped weapons and cemented one of the strongest inter-Primarch relations. That made what was to follow for the pair just that bit more tragic. In the run-up to the heresy, Manus was in fact warned by the Eldar of his upcoming death at Fulgrim's hand on the world-designated 1544, but he refused to believe the visions granted to him by the Xenos, just as Fulgrim would come to do. As the foundations for the Horus Heresy were laid, and the first traitors swore allegiance to Horus, Fulgrim was won over by the War Master and began his fall to chaos. He travelled to see Ferrus Manus not long after, believing, I assume, that his close bond with the Gorgon would allow the Phoenician to corrupt him. He was wrong. Ferrus was enraged with his brother, seemingly never entertaining the idea of falling to chaos, and the two came to blows. The fight was won by Fulgrim, who knocked Manus unconscious and stole Forgebreaker from him before departing, but Fireblade was destroyed, leaving the third Primarch without his signature weapon. Manus forged it anew, and joined the Loyalist forces on Istvan V ready to destroy Horus, Fulgrim, and all other traitors. The Iron Hands were at the forefront during the Drop Site massacre, though they were under strength after the battle with Fulgrim, and Manus' spearhead was the one to make the greatest progress during the initial combats. However, when the second wave arrived, there was disagreement on the next stage of the plan. Manus wished to keep pushing, whilst Corax and Vulcan advocated resupplying and falling back. No consensus was reached, and so the Iron Hands were left alone as the initial traitors crashed into them. Pushing on regardless, Manus and his elite guard known as Morlocks were able to reach Fulgrim and his Phoenix Guard. After a war of words went nowhere, the two clashed in battle, but now it was the 10th Primarch who wielded Fireblade and Fulgrim who used Forgebreaker. This time Ferrus had the upper hand, managing to disarm Fulgrim, who then drew the demonic Layer Blade and somehow overpowered his former best friend. And yet, just like after their initial duel, Fulgrim could not find it within himself to kill his defeated brother. But this time, the Layer Blade's bound demon lashed out and allowed the Phoenician to do the deed, beheading the Gorgon. Manus was the first Primarch to die in the Horus Heresy, and he would certainly not be the last, his head offered to Horus as a trophy. The Iron Hands were then supposedly slain to almost a man, with their Primarch and first captain dead, but elements were able to survive and continue fighting after the Drop Site massacre in their own way. One of the most famous is the guerrilla group led by Shadrach Medusan, but we shall discuss him and them a little later. At this point, however, the Iron Tenth were pretty much out of the heresy in terms of taking part in any major engagements. The Iron Hands were not present on Terra in any notable strength, if they were even there at all. Their acting head at the time is unknown, for the position as leader of the 10th Legion would not last for long after the heresy. Around the time of the decree from Warut Guilliman to separate the legions into chapters, could not confirm which way round it actually was, the remaining leaders of the Iron Hands gathered on Medusa, along with the rest of their brothers, to discuss the way forward. Deciding to take the Codex Astartes one step further, the Iron Hands decided that they would not have a single master, and so the Iron Council was formed as the new leaders of the chapter. The Brazen Claws and the Red Talons were also formed at this time, meaning that the Legion was probably back up to a few thousand Marines by the time of this meeting, better known now as the Tempering. Evidently the gene stocks of the 10th had been pretty well drained, or the idea that the Iron Hands were almost wiped out on Istvan V was greatly exaggerated. The Iron Council is still in place today, now with 41 members known as Iron Fathers, a rank unique to the Iron Hands that combines the role of Chaplain and Tech Marine, including Venerable Dreadnoughts, though it does seemingly have a leader who would be the equivalent to Chapter Master. This Iron Father carries no official rank above the others, but they will probably be the public face of the Iron Council and have a lot of convincing power amongst his brothers. At this moment, the individual is known as Cardan Stronos, the longest-serving leader of the Iron Hands beside Manus himself. As for the way the Iron Hands have acted since the heresy, suffice it to say that the Gorgon would be turning in his grave if he knew about it. The Iron Hands have become almost as mechanically obsessed as the Adeptus Mechanicus, replacing large parts of their bodies with bionics in the belief that it would make them more worthy to join Manus and fight at the end of time. Oh, you poor deluded Astartes. They are now an uncompromising, straightforward powerhouse of a force that wish to purge all weakness within themselves and across the galaxy. And so with the tale of the Iron Tenth told, at least while they were a legion, now it is time to delve into the notable individuals from the same period. The Morlocks were the first company of the Iron Hands, elite warriors all in Terminator armour who formed the honour guard of Ferrus Manus. They were the toughest warriors in the Legion, embodiments of Manus' desire for strength to rule and weakness to be purged. Their leader at the time of the Horus Heresy was Gabriel Santar, the equerry to the Gorgon. Santar was at Manus' side for both of the major events in the heresy to involve the Legion and the Gorgon. He was wounded by the Emperor's children during Fulgrim's flight from their fleet, along with a handful of his brothers. His injuries were bad, not unable to fight bad, but still pretty serious, and yet that didn't stop the first captain from heading down to Istvan V alongside his Primarch to confront the traitors. He fought against the first captain of the 3rd Legion, Julius Caesoron, who had actually inflicted the injuries on Santar during the previous battle. Both were gravely wounded, but eventually it was Caesoron who'd won, thanking Santar for the incredibly pleasurable experience as he killed him. Other notable Morlocks were Ignatius Newman, accredited with slaying the first ever Noise Marine after being deafened in the Dropsite Massacre, and Vermanus Cybus, a vocal advocate of the now common mantra among the 10th, the flesh is weak. Cybus was the one to lead the surviving remnants of the Iron Hands, along with a couple of Raven Guarded Salamanders, to the modified strike cruiser called the Sisypheum. From there, the ragtag force, not led by Cybus from this point, went on its own little vengeance crusade, disrupting traitors at every turn. They stole a device to permit the decoding of traitor communications, attempted and almost succeeded to assassinate Fulgrim, and were generally a major nuisance for the servants of Horus. This group is honestly most famous for the Raven Guard operative Nicona Sharokin, who was part of it, so we'll touch more on it when we come to the Sons of Korax. As for the Morlocks themselves, the group lives on after a fashion. They were also known as the Averni Clan Company, and the Averni exists today as the equivalent to the first company in the Iron Hands chapter, meaning that the legacy of Santar, Cybus and their brothers has managed to survive for over 10,000 years. Perhaps the most famous individual of the Iron Hands during the Horus Heresy was the captain of Clan Sorgol, the former 10th captain of the Legion and now the 6th company of the chapter. He was Shadrach Bloody Medusan, a Terran-born who altered his surname after Manus was discovered to reflect his devotion to the Gorgon and Medusa. He was an extremely competent commander on campaign. In fact, First Captain Santar was willing to follow his plan and defer command to him when he returned to the battle on 1544. Medusa was not on Istvan V's surface during the drop site massacre, but he saw it all from space and was forced to defend his vessel the Ironside from traitor boarders. He and his ship escaped along with other elements of the Iron Hands and saw his company bolstered by remnants of the Morlocks, Salamanders, and Raven Guard. Despite their mishmash nature, Medusan's company wound up as the commander of the force after the clan fathers leading them were slain and the war leader Jebez Org was crippled in a Sons of Horus ambush. Medusan then transformed himself into some kind of boogeyman for the traitors, leading his forces in a guerrilla war to disrupt Horus's armies and try and gather more Istvan survivors. He met with decent success, recovering brothers and gaining members from other legions, but his big moves came at the Battle of Dwell. Here, his forces attempted to assassinate Horus, Mortarion, and Fulgrim at once, and whilst obviously failing, his Stormbird gunships did wound all three Primarchs. His assassination team on the ground were also able to grievously injure little Horus Aximander of the Mornival after being deployed out of position, and the Battle of Dwell and its aftermath are counted as the best Imperial assassination attempt on Horus in the Heresy. Shows how well Malcador's attempts went, eh? As for the fate of Medusan, well, we don't actually know. His fleet was pursued by a Sons of Horus force led by the same commander who ambushed them after Istvan, and his identity was stolen and mimicked by none other than the Primarch Alpharius, but whether he lived on or died is unknown. I hope to see the tale of Shadrach resolved some way, either through death or a place on the Iron Council, but I fear he may have fallen like so many of his brothers had before him. Not every clan company of the Iron Hands was able to become a company of the chapter following the tempering. Obviously, there were only 10 slots available after all. One of those known to miss out was Clan Moragul, though it is thought that this group would be the ones who led the Red Talons chapter post-tempering due to the almost identical iconography. Very little is known of the clan at large, but we do know of their leader and the potential first chapter master of the Red Talons, Iron Father Ortek Mor. Mor was a Terran, just like Shadrach Medusan, but unlike the Sorgol war leader, he was not fond of Manus and co. In fact, it is known that he and the Gorgon had no love between them. The Iron Father of Moragul was a stern, exacting leader, but this was probably necessary as the clan was used as a home for those within the Legion considered unstable or simply outcasts, though this may have been Mor's doing as he was known to have killed several legionaries in duels over slighted honour. Mor was, therefore, an ideal candidate to turn traitor during the heresy, and when you consider the rumours of issues with his gene seed, then it seemed pretty cut and dry that he would fall. But he did not. In fact, I can't think of a single Iron Hand who did fall now that I think about it. When he arrived in the Istvan system in his ship the Red Talon, more evidence for his clan becoming the founders of that chapter, he fought with the Loyalists as hard as any of his brothers, and only retreated after suffering heavy damage. In case you were wondering why he was late, it's because Manus was too impatient to go on the attack and didn't wait for the entirety of the 10th to assemble before making planetfall. Mor kept on hounding the traitors throughout the heresy, most notably against the World Eaters Legion. The 12th Legion used a planet called Bodt, B-O-D-T, I'll leave you to pronounce that, as a training world and also as a sort of homeworld. They could hardly use Nuceria after all, and were using that to rapidly grow new members alongside elements of the Word-Bearers. Ortek Mor and his forces, consisting of many shattered legionaries, a term for the Dropsite Massacre survivors, alongside Imperial Fists and other Iron Hands, were able to not only destroy Bod by crashing its moon into it, but also recover some sort of stasis casket with the Emperor's gene rights engraved onto it. No idea what it was for or if it was used, I'm afraid. Mor's fate after the heresy is also unknown, but I would wager that he survived and became the chapter master of the Red Talons after the tempering. Either that, or his clan named it after his flagship in his honour because he had unfortunately died. So end the heresy-era tales of the Iron Hands Legion. Whilst they were uncompromising, blunt, and a little bit cuckoo regarding machines, they were still incredibly brave and stalwart warriors who were devoted to the cause of the Imperium in their own unique way, just as much as any other, more lauded legion. The sons of Ferrus Manus may not have the bodies their father would have wished for them, but their deeds and traits would only please the Gorgon. I hope you enjoyed the third part of Legions, our 40k Stories miniseries delving into the various Legion Astartes. Now all that remains is to drop back into the webway and head for our next Legion world. En route, I'll be covering the history of perhaps the most widespread and dangerous Xenos faction in the galaxy, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you all for watching. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.